want more from their companies. They want more from their work experience. They don't want their job to be their life. You can just hire a bunch of diverse people and boom, your number goes up, right? But are they going to stay? Do they feel valued? Do we respect their opinions? Do they have career aspirations that we can support and that we can provide them with mentorship and a voice? And do they feel that they have all of those things? And if they have that, then yes, we should look at metrics and how are we trending and all of those things. But if we don't have any of that other stuff, the D doesn't matter. Like, we might as well not do it, because then it's just, a performative metric. But in the sports landscape, right, it's historically very non-diverse on the business side. And so how can we really help people that aren't typically able to break into the business? How can we help them get that exposure? So we've really tapped into a lot of partnerships, a lot of schools that have allowed us to provide education, provide opportunities, provide internships. We partner very closely with the Black Student Athlete Summit. So really trying to pull talent from former athletes, people that, maybe were going to go pro, but they're not now. And now they want a career in like the business side of sport.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of our HR Heroes podcast. I'm incredibly excited because I have Kate McKinnon here with me today. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Today is going to be an awesome conversation because we're going to talk about your history and the things that you're doing from an HR perspective. We're going to talk about your role at PlayFi Sports. We're going to talk about the changing landscape of work, culture, people, all these amazing topics. But before we get into this, I'd love to ask a human-centric question to get us started. So, Kate, how's your heart doing today?
Aw, that's a great question. It's good. It's good. I just had a really, really nice conversation with one of my team members, and I'm feeling really good today. How about you?
My heart's doing good. I love having these types of conversations. I've been trying to do a much better job of slowing down and appreciating this current version of myself. I feel like in life, I'm often kind of racing to the next milestone or finish line, if you will. And sometimes as I've gotten a little bit older, I'll be turning 34 this year, I start to recognize that sometimes slowing down and appreciating this version of myself who's just figuring things out and is having victories and small losses and all that kind of stuff is something that I'll look back on one day and really want to appreciate a little bit more. So I'm trying to be more present here. So I'm feeling pretty solid with that mindset today.
Be where your feet are. That is
that's right.
Good thing to live by.
Yeah. So as we kind of get into today's episode, I want to pose the question that came from our last guest. Now, Dahlia is a talent acquisition leader for her hospitality company. And she has a question. What is the one thing that you would change about your talent acquisition or recruiting process if you could?
Wow. I think, everywhere I've been where I have been responsible for overseeing the talent acquisition process, I always want to be able to inject more personal touches into our process. You can't for so many reasons, right? Time and money and budget and all of those things. But I think the more you can really understand and reflect on the person that's sitting in front of you, the better the better your ability to determine whether they're going to be the right fit for your organization. So whether that be like real life shadowing or job previewing, I just think that that's so valuable if you can do it.
It's interesting because especially in the world of talent acquisition and HR, we see a lot of technology that's being thrust into the space like AI. And I see a lot of clips and headlines on LinkedIn as an example that say, if AI gets into talent acquisition, it's going to eliminate that human touch element, which is so important. So what's kind of your perspective on the role of technology, especially in, that space?
Yeah. I think it's a tool, right? But it has to be used as a tool. So one way that we're looking at incorporating AI is really around note-taking and summarizing of an interview, whether it be recording an interview and then allowing us to be able to send a more thorough recap to a hiring manager, whether it be, being able to assist people through the process if maybe they are differing in ability. I think those are tools that you can really utilize and lean on, but you still need people to manage it. So I think if it replaces people, then I don't love it, but I don't think that it's going to. I think it's just going to aid in what we're already doing.
Yeah, technology definitely needs to be positioned as an accelerator, not a replacement. And I feel like that sense of curiosity, if you will, that kind of gives us the ability to say, where does this fit into my role? Where does this fit into my
Mhm.
job? How can it help me do the things I'm doing better? But it's never going to replace me. And I
Right.
feel like that mindset of replacement kind of comes from like a scarcity mindset. It reminds
Mhm.
me a lot of the dot-com bubble. It reminds me a lot of when the
Yes.
tractor was invented. It seems like we're doing the same pattern over and over again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it stems from fear, fear that I'm replaceable or that my job is going away. And so I think it just ties back to the importance of always being curious and being willing to learn and broaden your experience, because then you can use the tools that are new and that are upcoming, and you don't feel as though they're going to replace you. Because if you stay up on all of the new things, then you're irreplaceable, in my opinion.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. That sense of curiosity is really interesting for me because I feel like you had a healthy sense of curiosity when you were trying to pursue your initial interest in criminal psychology. And then you went into sales and then you went into HR. So let's kind of talk about the role of curiosity that played in your career journey. And why
Yeah.
don't you kind of lay it out for everybody who's tuning in for us?
Yeah, I mean, I am a perfect example of a very non-traditional HR professional. Started my career in criminal psychology. Was very passionate about that underlying um, why people do what they do, I guess, is the easiest way to explain that. And so I just took it to an extreme and really was interested in why criminals do what they do and how they can be rehabilitated, and worked in that space for about 5 years after I graduated, and realized pretty short, well, I guess it's long in that type of an environment, but realized that I needed to make a career change, and so I followed my dad's path into sales, and I fell in love with it. So the people piece has always been a common theme throughout my career, but just absolutely loved sales. I loved being able to build relationships and not make people buy things, but help people realize where I could present a solution. And so, during my time in sales, I saw a couple of common themes, but two of which were nobody liked any HR people that they dealt with, and myself included. So our whole philosophy was like, stay off the radar, right? Like, just do your job, make money, don't involve HR. If HR is involved, it's a negative thing, right? And so they would, our HR teams would come in and they would do town halls, and people would say, it's great, everything's great, because they just didn't want to be on the radar.
Why do you
And
think
then,
we had that early fear of HR
ugh,
as an example? Because you get into sales, like why do we kind of have that, I would say, passed down mentality of like HR is coming, be quiet, everything's fine here.
yeah.
Why do you think that kind of was inbred as a fear like element?
Ugh. Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons for it. One, I think that HR oftentimes plays the role of almost the police of an organization, or that's the perception, like they're the no people. So I think that that's one of the things. But then the other part of it is that there's a thought that they just slow down a process. So whether it's that they, say no and put a stop to things, or they put roadblocks in the way so you can't achieve your goals, there's just always a sense that like involving HR is just going to make you unable to do your job. And so as opposed to, in my mind, really having the ability to help people do their jobs and to help remove obstacles, it was just always like, just keep them as far away as you can.
It's really interesting because in our previous call, you said at one point in time you became obsessed with the idea that you could change people's minds about what HR is. So
Yeah.
how did you kind of fall into that idea or that obsession?
Well, I thought that there had to be a better way. If HR is there to protect the company, which is our job, and that's why we're hired, I thought that there was a different way to look at that, which is by empowering employees and by caring for employees, that it's not just one person or one department that's protecting the company. In turn, employees will love the environment in which they work, and they will also want to protect the culture that they've created. And so instead of just having one person that's responsible, it's really having a company full of people that really care about the company and what they're doing. So, I just felt that if I could help people see that by doing what I said I was going to do, and by enabling a trusted relationship with HR, that I would slowly be able to change people's minds. And, I think that's where the selling piece really ties in. I mean, I was in sales for over 10 years. And I do think I actually saw on LinkedIn today somebody that said, if you are in HR and you don't see yourself as a salesperson, you're in the wrong line of work. And I really believe that. I mean, our whole job is to sell our job and to sell ourselves. And so I love being able to, just like I would go into a potential client and I would try to sell a product, I really love being able to have somebody say, oh, wait a minute, like, I actually do need you. I need you to help me think through things. I need you to help me with strategy. And so to me, that's like such a win. And it ties together just the love that I had of sales as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in our previous conversation, you said one of my biggest things that I do is I treat every employee as if they are a customer.
Mhm.
So why do you think, other than the sales element, that stuff is important to be able to kind of nurture the culture of an organization as well?
Well, when I'm training team members, I like them to think of the old sales term, the WIFM, which most people are like, I don't know what that is, but it just means what's in it for me. So anytime you're talking to somebody, keeping in mind what their objectives are and what their motivations are and the things that drive them really helps you tailor your approach and the way that you practice HR to each individual person. And everybody's different. So if you don't take that approach and you take a blanket, I'm going to treat everybody as just this, generic employee, you're not really getting to the heart of, going back to the original question, right? Like, you're not really tapping into the heart of the why. Like, why are people doing what they're doing? What motivates them? How can you help drive employee behavior by really tapping into who they are as a person? And I think that in order to do that, it takes a lot of time, which is why a lot of HR people are unable to do so, because it does take a lot of time. And it also takes a lot of it's tiring. It's a very exhausting. You're really giving a lot of yourself in your job. So if you're not passionate about that, it can be really challenging. But I think it's
I know
important for a culture.
Oh, I agree 1,000%. One of the things that I was really inspired by when we had our previous conversation was you talking about creating growth opportunities that are cross-departmental in your organization as well. And you used a good example of an individual inside of your organization, their position was eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
And what you did is you put them into a new position. And at the previous conversation, they were starting their new role. So why don't you kind of walk us through kind of the element of that individual's position being taken away, which is a scary experience for so many people. Mm-hmm. But then your willingness to put them in a new position and then end up finding a new position for them in the organization.
Yeah, I think it's an unusual example, but I think it's a really cool example of a person that, we talk about right people, right seat. And sometimes you're the wrong person in a seat, and sometimes you're the right person, but you're in the wrong seat. And in this particular case, this was an employee who was the right person. He fit in with our culture. He, extended himself. People loved being around him, and he was super smart and very talented. And his role was eliminated because there was just no need for his position any longer. But the conversation was, my team, our talent acquisition team, we had just lost somebody. So we were really, really struggling. And so we thought, well, why don't we'll eliminate your position. If you're open to it, let's talk about what that could look like and how you could still stay with the company. We need help on our team. I know it's a little unconventional, but you have a great background because you've been doing a job within our company. So you can recruit very easily, talk to people about what it's like working here from your perspective. You can help us out while you interview for other positions that you think might be a good fit. We didn't change his compensation. We allowed him to do that. And he was, it took a little bit of time. I know that's a very emotional thing, losing your job or thinking you're going to lose your job. But, kudos to him because he leaned into it just as much as we did and said, you know what, yeah, I'll do this. And he did. And he was an amazing asset to our team. He sat with us for almost 2 months while he interviewed for another position. And the day that we talked was the first day of his new job. So, and he's successful in that now too. So I think, it doesn't work for everybody and it has to be both parties coming together to really lean into the process. But when it works, wow, it's pretty cool when it works.
I want to talk about kind of bridging that tough conversation because tough conversations is
Yeah.
something that I find a lot of leaders are naturally kind of shying away from, right? But having a candorous conversation about what the current situation looks like, giving context, and then being able to say, this is what the future looks like is a great way to kind of bridge that gap. So, how did you kind of approach that
Mhm.
conversation with them when you said, hey, like you said, this is scary, your position's being eliminated, but we want to put you in this different position? Were they receptive to that? How did you kind of open up that door for that conversation?
I mean, I was just honest. And I think, that it's hard, right? I mean, being honest, I think, is a hard practice. We're so used to in business and in HR, sort of sugarcoating or trying to make things fluffier than they are, but acknowledging like, this sucks. Like, this is tough news. It's not good for us because we really value you and we think you're a great contributor, but we have some ideas. And if you would be open to those ideas, you don't have to make a decision now, but we want to lay them out for you. And so I think, my team is empowered to do that. I'll have the conversation myself too. And then really rallying and really doing it. Like, that's the other part, right? You could say all the things, but if you don't do it and you don't follow up, it could really be disastrous for the company and for the employee experience, right? Because then you've completely diminished any of your credibility. So I think it's doing what you say you're going to do, being honest and authentic, and acknowledging like, this is a really hard conversation and I don't want to have it any more than you want to receive it. But here we are, and we still value you as an employee and really, really want to make this work. Also, understand if because of this situation, it's not the right place for you. Like, I think that that's also letting them know, like, you have the choice too. Like, you might feel like, hey, this company is not interested in me. I'm going to go find something else, and we'll support you through that transition as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I think I brought this up in our previous book together, or our previous conversation together, was this book, Gary Vaynerchuk's 12 and a half.
Yes.
And one of the 12th and a half ingredient in here is kind candor. Because I feel like having those tough conversations is very difficult and a scary process. But when we approach them with an honest foundation and we can say, hey, this is what the situation is, it takes a lot of the misinterpretation and the sting out of that conversation, if that makes sense. But I feel like a lot of people struggle with those tough conversations because
It
they're
does.
scary. It's a
I
very
hate them.
interesting,
I mean, I am, it's, yeah, it does not come naturally to me to have difficult conversations. I stay up at night. I stress about it. It is not something that is easy for me either. And I think that that's where really leaning into the relationships with employees is so important. I knew him. I knew what he was capable of. I knew that he was a high performer. And so knowing that and knowing that I wouldn't come to somebody malintended, right? Like, my goal is to help. And so I think really building those relationships and building those trusted relationships allows you to have tough conversations when you have to. There was a
yeah, I
book I
mean, it's just
read.
a,
It was my first book ever in grad school. It was called "How Full Is Your Bucket," and it was all about the act of making deposits and constantly making deposits, so that when you do have to take money away or a penny away or whatever it is, there's enough built up. There's enough. I forget what the word is that I want to use, but there's enough
like
credibility
reciprocity.
in
Yeah.
there that you're not. Yeah, like that you have some deposits in there. So you're not really depleting it if you just take something out or you have a tough conversation, and that's really important.
I think this is a good opportunity for us to kind of segue into the topic of retaining and developing talent. So I know that we talked about
Mhm.
your creative ability to give this individual another opportunity to grow inside the organization. But when you have a team of 800 plus like you do, how are you kind of thinking about the emphasis on training and creating creative pathways for progression with your team?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think it's a little bit unique in the sports space because it is very much a ladder mentality, right? You start at the bottom, you work your way up. And I think that there's value in that for sure. But I also think that there's an important piece that people forget, which is oftentimes the job that you think you're going to do when you come out of college is not necessarily the job that you end up doing for your career. And so having some flexibility about and talking about people's interests is really important to us. We've put in a couple of different tools to help us monitor people's progression and what their interests are. And we really encourage people to talk to their managers about, if something's not a fit anymore, what might be a fit, or if they're looking to grow, how are they looking to grow, and having those candid developmental conversations. So we have a continuous feedback platform that we use that asks some of those questions on a weekly basis so people can feel very comfortable putting them in writing, but also, if they don't feel comfortable putting them in writing, we have a check-in process where they have to have those conversations with their managers on a regular basis. We also operate on a lattice framework. So if somebody, say, is in a selling role and decides that, hey, I'm selling at a property, and that's not really what I want to do long term. I'd rather be on the operations side of the business. Then they have the opportunity to talk to our operations team, to look at open roles with our operations team, to make that pivot. And also helping people understand what that looks like from a compensation perspective and a titling perspective is really important too. So, if you're a VP of sales at a property, the reality is you're likely not going to go into a VP of operations role because you still need to learn the operation side of the business. So it's like, how do you get up there and really understand what that looks like? And so we just really value that. And it's taken some time for people to fully believe that that's something that we value, that they're not going to be penalized for saying, hey, I don't know if this is really where my passion lies anymore. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing that you're disclosing that, and that we can help you get to where you need to be. Ultimately, if we have a good employee, we don't want to lose them to competition so that they can go somewhere else and try something different. We want to keep them. So how do we make that happen?
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is when we get out of college, or get out of high school rather, we are asked to make the biggest decisions in our life, meaning pick a career for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But just 1 month ago, we were asked to raise our hand to go to the bathroom, which is a crazy dichotomy if you think about that. And so giving people the ability to choose their pathway and switch and change their mind, which I feel like is a superpower, gives you guys the ability to retain top talent, put them in positions where they can be passionate, and it gives you guys the business results at the end of the day, which I feel like is just so amazing.
It's awesome. And it offers that cross collaboration. I mean, if you have somebody like when we brought somebody over to our team, they had the background of working, not with us, working in the field. And so they could bring that perspective to candidates. And then now when they transition to another team and they're working on the sales side, they can say, hey, have a little patience with the talent acquisition team, because their process, it's not easy what they do, because I've done it. So it allows for better collaboration, better understanding, more empathy in the workplace. You learn skills in one role or one division that you might use in a different division, and you bring a completely different perspective. And that's a great asset to a company.
What do you think about the changing generations of work? Because it seems like before the pandemic, we were living to work, but now people are working to live. Now, I know this creates, I would say, different expectations and how work is positioned in our lives. But from an HR perspective, how are you kind of navigating this generational change, and what does that shift mean to you?
Wow, I have so many thoughts about this. We were just talking about it yesterday. We had the Syracuse WISE group, so women in sports and events, came in, and we were talking specifically about this. So it's very timely. But a couple of just initial thoughts. One, I actually love it. I think it's a really important, very healthy change, even though it makes my job way harder. I think it's a long time coming, and I think it's really, really good and healthy. I think coming out of the pandemic, there's so many impacts that we have seen as a result of the pandemic. One is that people are coming out of school. Last year I think was the worst of it. This year I think people are starting to really give a lot of education around what it looks like to be in the workplace and how important it is to have interpersonal skills. But we were seeing a big deficit last year in particular, when people were graduating after they hadn't been around people. They hadn't had those real job opportunities, internships that were in person. There was a skill set missing from just having that interpersonal connectivity and understanding that being in an office and having those relationships actually does help your career. It might not be for everybody. And I think that it's important that there's flexibility for people that just want to work remotely, but you are getting something different when you're working in person. And I think that that focus is starting to come back a little bit now, where we're interviewing people that are saying, you know what? I'd rather be in person because I missed out on that. And I really want that mentorship and guidance. I think the biggest challenge is that, people want more from their companies. They want more from their work experience. They don't want their job to be their life. And the biggest challenge that we have is helping the generations that have come before, myself included, by the way, understand that the way that we worked and my, work 15-hour a day days is not the reality now. And that's okay. And the workforce is going to slowly change with that new reality. And our way of working and our way of doing things will become antiquated. And it kind of already is. So not expecting that from people right off the bat, being very clear and setting expectations, being very transparent when you see things like salary transparency now becoming laws in multiple states. Those are just different drivers that help people understand that, I'm going to be making this amount of money. This is a contract. I provide you with work and you provide me with income. And that is all that it is. It's a transactional contract. There are wonderful benefits. I will give you all of, myself while I'm in the workplace, and you should be also meeting me halfway, meeting me in the middle and accepting me as a full person, right? Like my authentic self should be able to come to work. And I think what's happening too is that this loyalty that we saw back, I think it was even the generation before mine, where companies were just incredibly loyal to their employees and, people were working somewhere for 30, 40, 50 years. It just doesn't happen anymore. And so employees are saying, well, if you're not loyal to me, why should I be loyal to you? Like, it's not just a one-way street. And having that transparent relationship and social media exposing that has aided, I think, in this new generation saying, like, no more. Like, we'll come to work and we'll do our job and that's it. And that's okay.
I feel like a huge driver of that comes with an element of psychological safety. I bring that up because it seems like today there are more headlines, news stories, breaking news stories that say Google cuts 12,000 jobs via email, Zoom cuts 1,300, Amazon 12,000. And we've experienced this coming up in our generation of work time that says, if these large organizations are not going to be loyal to us, then why am I going to be loyal to you? It's a really interesting dichotomy. And so how do you continue to kind of nurture the element of psychological safety with your team, knowing that they've had all of these traumatic secondary experiences from everything that we're exposed to via social media and everything like that?
I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I think you want to be transparent and help people understand that, like, your employer, like, we're doing a job, right? We're all doing a job. At the end of the day, I'm replaceable. They could go out and find another HR leader. They're not going to offer the same things, but the fact is everybody's replaceable. That's just really the nature of the beast. And so I think just being honest about that and helping people understand that, at least for my team, I have always told everybody on my team, if this is no longer the place for you, just come to me. Let's talk about it. And I will help you get to the next phase of your career, or I will give you a recommendation. You can help me transition somebody else in. We could help, we could bridge that gap together. And so I think that there's a really healthy respect there. And my leaders have said the same thing to me. And so I think just being open and honest with the fact that, do I think that my team is going to be with Playfly for 25 years? Like, I would be crazy to think that. Like, that's just not the reality of work anymore. And so I think that just recognizing that and being honest with that, and that it's not about loyalty and it's not about your relationship. It's about people at the end of the day, and it's not a negative connotation, but people are innately selfish. They should be. It's just you. Like, you have to make decisions that are best for you, for your family, for your future. And leaving a company is not necessarily a bad thing if it's for your future. And also helping people see that the grass isn't always greener either. So, like, there's two different ways of looking at it. Like, absolutely you should go, but also recognize that there are a lot of things that we do here that maybe aren't able to be replicated at another company. So just know like what you might be leaving, and keeping the door open if you're losing a good employee, saying, listen, if the grass isn't greener, just give me a call. You're welcome back. So I think that's important.
I feel like that's an interesting area of conversation, because I see a lot on social media today. People are often talking about, if you want to get rich, never stay at a job longer than 16 months. If you jump, you have the ability to make more money. If you jump, you have the ability to make more money. It's like a ladder or a game of Frogger. So how do you kind of
Yeah.
look at organizational loyalty as being something that helps you build culture with the societal pressures that come and say you shouldn't be at a job for more than 16 months? It's an interesting dichotomy.
Well, I think acknowledging that, right? Like saying we don't want somebody, if they want to advance or get promoted, we don't want that to be that they have to leave the company in order to do so. So that's where, talking about your career aspirations comes in, right? If it's a career conversation, I think that that's something that we can do. If it's financial only, then yeah, sometimes you go to a competitor or you go somewhere else and you get more money. But also educating people with, like, make sure if that's what you want and you're driven by only by money, then that probably is the way that you're going to have to go. Because the fact of the matter is, we're not going to be giving 25% increases every year. That's just not the case. So I think it goes back to understanding people's motivations. If it's culture, if it's diversity, if it's training and development, if it's mentorship, if it's money, if it's recognition, understanding what makes up your workforce is really important. I also think doing compensation surveys annually, making sure that you're paying people equitably, that you're not trailing the market, that you have a pulse on where compensation lies, so that you know that you're paying people fairly, and that you have a compensation philosophy that aligns with that. So if your philosophy is, and ours has been, right, like, we're a startup, for the most part. We've gotten a lot bigger, and we've acquired other companies, but we're never going to pay people at the 90th percentile in the industry. That's just not feasible. But because we're a startup, you might make a little bit less, but you have all of these other benefits that you might not have if you go to a very large player. And that's a decision that people have to make. And I think that also stems from the interview process and having conversations about what motivates people, and being honest and transparent about your pay practices is also really important there.
I feel like today's working generation wants to be a part of a culture where they know they can access things like mentorship, leadership development, and they have a cultural leader like yourself who really prioritizes things like DEI and B. So let's kind of talk about why mentorship, leadership development, and DE&I are things that you're prioritizing as part of PlayFi's culture.
Yeah, I mean, I'm innately just passionate about all of those things separate from PlayFi. Like, I've implemented them everywhere I've gone because I think that they're so invaluable to helping to create a culture of oneness and collaboration. And I think it's just what people deserve and what people are looking for. But in the sports landscape, right, it's historically very non-diverse on the business side. And so how can we really help people that aren't typically able to break into the business? How can we help them get that exposure? So we've really tapped into a lot of partnerships, a lot of schools that have allowed us to provide education, provide opportunities, provide internships. We partner very closely with the Black Student Athlete Summit. So really trying to pull talent from former athletes, people that, maybe were going to go pro, but they're not now. And now they want a career in like the business side of sport. Like, how do we help educate them on how to get there? And so DEIB has taken a lot of different looks at PlayFi because our company has evolved and our teams have evolved and our business has evolved. And now it's really employee led. So our goal when establishing our DEIB philosophy and our platforms was really to eventually turn it over to the employees to operate it how they wanted to. And so we have employee led IRGs that came from employees saying, these are the ones we want. So we stood them up. We helped to provide some structure and some training and best practices around that. And now they're completely running on their own for the most part with sponsorship, but running on their own. And so every year we've been adding a couple more that people are asking for in employee surveys and employee feedback. And we'll continue to do that because I think it's really important. I think that that's something that is just a no-brainer. Like if you don't have that in a company, I think that it's a miss. It just point blank, it's just a miss. I think having diversity of thought and diversity in your workforce is critical. I mean, I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I had a previous guest on the podcast who said something. He said, Keenan, before there was HR, before there was DE&I, there were human beings who cared. And one thing to mention is that the organizations that are truly practicing DE&I are not the ones that have public statements about what DE&I is, but they're being practitioners of what DE&I means. And that often means the employees embodying the practices that are necessary for us to create that environment of diversity and inclusion. And I feel like you guys are doing an amazing job of being able to demonstrate what that looks like by having those not be executive-led initiatives, but by being able to listen to what the employees want and then being able to support them through their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there were a lot of people that didn't agree with me when I first came on board that wanted DEIB initiatives. And I said, and they would say like, what is success, right? Like, what's the metric? Like how many more diverse individuals are we bringing into the company? And I said, that's a just full stop right there. My philosophy is that the D is the last part. The equity, the inclusion, the belonging is the critical part. Once we have that right, then we can focus on the D. Because that's an easy thing to change, right? You can just hire a bunch of diverse people and boom, your number goes up, right? But are they going to stay? Do they feel valued? Do we respect their opinions? Do they have career aspirations that we can support and that we can provide them with mentorship and a voice? And do they feel that they have all of those things? And if they have that, then yes, we should look at metrics and how are we trending and all of those things. But if we don't have any of that other stuff, the D doesn't matter. Like we might as well not do it because then it's just, a performative metric. Do
you feel like that's why DE&I has failed in so many different organizations? Because when we think about diversity, we're not thinking about each of our individual life experiences and the innovation of thought that we bring to a perspective, but rather the culture or the, nationality of an individual. And it seems like we've almost flipped the equation to be able to say D is first, but it should be D is last, like you talked about.
Yeah, I think so. I think, the idea behind having DEI initiatives is it's a buzzword, right? Like it's something that people are like, oh yeah, diversity, like that's something that we care about now. And that's just not the reality of it. The reality is that diversity exists. You either embrace it or you don't. If you embrace it, then you embrace it fully. And it's hard. It is hard work. It is not, we work with a DEIB consultant who I adore and she's amazing. But she's like, it's not like it's a passion project. You're not getting paid additional dollars to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Anybody that's involved in the practice of whether it be internal or external or consultants or HR or whoever's embodying these ideas and values, they just believe in it. And that's why they're doing it. And it's in addition to all the other things because it's hard work and there's a lot of misconceptions that come along with it. And there's a lot of training and development that goes into it. And there's a lot of vulnerability that goes into it. And there's a lot of, I think one of the reasons that it fails is because people that might look like myself, I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to say something that's incorrect. I'm going to offend somebody at some point. I'm going to relate to an experience that I can't really relate to. And people are going to have to feel like they can call me out. And so there's a vulnerability and it's scary. And when you're in an executive level position, it's really scary because your career could be at risk if you say the wrong thing. And I think that is oftentimes why it's not embraced and not successful, because you have executive level leaders in a company that are afraid of the work. And they kind of can be because of like the culture now, if you say something wrong, right, like it can be blasted everywhere and everybody knows about it. So like it's scary to put yourself out there, but that's, I think, a key component of DEI work is that you have to be vulnerable and you have to be accepting of like, this is hard. And guess what? Like me being uncomfortable is how other people feel all the time. So
Yeah, I know. It's very interesting because it seems like in order for you to be successful at DE&I, you have to be a true practitioner. Because if you're not a
yeah,
practitioner, then you're going to come to the table and say, "Hey, this is what we're doing now." And that sort of, I would say, out of the pocket announcement gets more eyeballs than somebody who's actually a practitioner every day and embodies the things that they're trying to practice as well. It's just a very interesting time. I know a lot of leaders find themselves being a little gun shy because, like
Mhm.
you said, social media in itself is an amazing tool, but it also creates so many waves in our society if you say something wrong. And it's a
Yeah.
place in our society where I can't really agree with how it should be, but it is what it is. And I feel like in order for us to move forward, we have to get past a lot of these hurdles. And I think time will tell who's a true practitioner of these type of elements. And I know that you're doing an amazing job in kind of leading your organization to the future of HR. So my question for you is, if we look at the future of HR for Playfly, how do you think you're going to be able to get past the transactional nature that HR once was into this place of true people and culture like you've been trying to embody?
I mean, I think we're there. I think the clock always starts over when we have another acquisition. That's really the challenge. So it usually takes, I would say, about a year for a company when you acquire an organization, especially a larger one. The time extends depending on the size. So we recently acquired an organization with 140 employees. So I'd say about a year before they feel like they're really embraced, that they have trusting relationships with people in the organization. They feel like they're truly a part of the company. And that's just normal. But every time we bring in a new organization, that trust clock kind of starts over again. And so I really think it's just being built on a foundation of trust is really the thing that drives that people focused HR, that proactive, solution oriented philosophy. I think as we continue to grow, the people piece also has to continue to grow to be able to support the type of HR that we're able to provide to our employees. And so that's a constant conversation, is resourcing the support functions in the way that they need to be to continue to practice the way that we've been. And so that's the biggest challenge because, it in a lot of companies, it is an expense to add to the support functions, but it really is necessary to be able to continue to get ahead of problems, really be proactive as it relates to all things people, whether it's understanding what's going on with a manager and whether they're leading appropriately or inappropriately, whether it's about training and development, whether it's about enabling people to focus on making money for the company. So taking some of those things off their plates where they can call us and say, hey, listen, I'm dealing with this situation and I don't know what to do. Can you help me think through this? As opposed to spending 30 hours just trying to figure out what to do, like having a trusted resource. So I just envision, continuing to do what we have been able to establish and do here. And I think we've done a pretty good job. And I think people really do look at us as a real strategic partner.
I feel like that's beautiful. I mean, the elements of HR continue to change, and I'm just so proud to be able to kind of share the space with an HR people-centric leader like you, who's really doing the work that's necessary to kind of continue to push our businesses in the right direction. And my hat goes off to you, Kate, and all the work that you guys are doing at Playfly, because it sounds like your organization is a true practitioner of everything that we've talked about today. It's just been such a pleasure to be able to kind of share this space with you and have you on the show. I just want to say thank you so much.
Oh, likewise. It's always nice to talk to somebody else outside of the organization about the things that we're doing, because we are super proud of them. And we've been really lucky. We've been enabled to do it from our leaders. So that's the other piece that, I think is a critical part of HR success, and being able to lead the people function in that way is having leadership that allows you to.
Absolutely. Well, I want to pose an opportunity for you to be able to ask our next guest a question. So what do you got for us, Kate?
So my question is a little bit similar to how we started the conversation. So kind of repeating a little bit, but with HR, the practice of, there's a lot of care for everybody else. And so my question would be, how are you caring for yourself in this space? And how do you know when you need a break? And are you taking that break?
I love that. That's an amazing people-centric question that's focused on the heart, because it's very difficult to pour from an empty cup, and we can't pour into other people unless we have the opportunity to fill our own first. And so that's an amazing place for us to end. Guys, once again, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the HR Heroes podcast with Kate McKinnon. It was an amazing time. Kate, thanks so much again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.